move.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. My name is Nell Pepper, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am delighted to introduce this virtual event with Susannah Drissi presenting her new novel, Until We're Fish, in conversation with Richard Blanco. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you for joining us virtually tonight. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community and our new digital community during these challenging times. Every week, we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account. And just like always, our event schedule will appear on our website at harvard.com, and you can sign up for our email newsletter for more updates. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we will get through as many questions as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase copies of Until We're Fish on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and of our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore in Harvard Square. So we thank you so much for showing up and tuning in support of our authors and of the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings recently, technical issues may arise. We hope they don't, but if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you so much for your patience and understanding. And now I am pleased to introduce our speakers. Susannah Drissi, PhD, is an award-winning Cuban-born poet, writer, playwright, translator, director, producer, and scholar. She is faculty in writing programs at UCLA, affiliate scholar in the UC Cuba Program Initiative, and associate literary editor for the journal Cuba Counterpoints. Born in Cuba in the 1970s, but coming of age in the US, Drissi writes about Cuba from the vantage point of the native and also from the benefit of a temporal and geographical distance. Richard Blanco was selected by President Obama as the 5th presidential inaugural poet in US history, and he is the youngest and the first Latino immigrant and gay person to serve in such a role. Born in Madrid to Cuban exile parents and raised in Miami, cultural identity characterizes his many collections of award-winning poetry, including his most recent How to Love a Country and his memoir, The Prince of Los Cocuyos, A Miami Childhood. Tonight, they are discussing Susannah Drissi's debut novel, Until We're Fish, a lyrical and elegiac coming-of-age story. Until We're Fish blends the romance, violence, and ethos of the Cuban Revolution with the young man's hopeless and heroic first love. Author Ruth Behar observes of Until We're Fish, in her soulful debut novel, Susannah Drissi offers a meditation on what it means to be Cuban, living between unfulfilled revolutionary ideals, lost illusions of love, and the sea, always the sea. And now I'm honored to turn things over to our speakers. The digital podium is yours, Susannah and Richard.
Thank you, Nell.
Thanks, Nell. Thanks to Harvard Bookstore. We're just reminiscing. I did a reading in person there a few years ago. What a wonderful space and a wonderful organization. So thank you. And welcome, Susannah, I guess.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Although we've never met, I feel like I know you obviously through your work. And of course, we have, all Cubans are related. So So anyway, just want to just jump right in with a few questions, and maybe I'd like to read, maybe if that's okay, read the blurb that my endorsement of this wonderful book to give a little more background on the book. Says, historically vibrant and sadly exquisite, Until We Fish renders a poetic and cinematic view of Cuba through the lens of loves, familial love, romantic love, patriotic love, and their complex intersections, all beautifully and uniquely told through this compelling story centered on lives that make history come alive. So you ready, Sue?
I'm ready.
Okay, vámonos.
I'm ready for you.
So In many ways, this novel is about beginnings in some way or another, right? I'm just wondering how beginnings or new beginnings have impacted your own life, and how maybe that is somehow would inform, maybe consciously or subconsciously, part of the novel.
Sure. So beginnings for me really mean departures in many ways. So one of my first beginnings was leaving Cuba in 1981 and beginning anew, or being forced to begin anew in a different country, in a different host country. And in this case, it was in the United States. We had to go to Costa Rica. We were at a time during the Mariel boat lift in 1980, and although my aunt had come for us several times, we were not able to leave, and so we waited until the next opportunity, and we landed in Costa Rica, and everything there spoke of beginnings. Learning, even though people spoke Spanish, it was a different kind of Spanish. So it was learning a new language, learning a new way of really moving about the world. People in different places walk differently, and they relate to each other differently. They look at each other differently. So for us, it was really starting from zero, not only in the sense of material things, because we arrived with very little, even though my aunt had made sure that we had an apartment and all of that, was the basics. And so we had to start friendships in many ways from scratch. Thankfully, there was a small community of Cubans there who welcomed us. Not too many, but enough. And some were from our small town of Bauta, some were not. Some are still in our Facebook, in our Facebook page. So that's wonderful. And so there was that beginning. There was, of course, like I said, the beginning of friendships and all of that, the beginning of an understanding that there was life outside of Cuba, I think, for me too, because even though I had read about other places, and I think when you're sort of enclosed in an island and you're saturated with island life, especially in the case of Cuba, it was difficult to imagine, other places, or to do so had to be the deliberate activity. And so to be in a different place was, unbelievable to me, to my sister, to my parents, and everything felt very young, And then once we sort of had our bearings in Costa Rica, we had to begin again, And so 3.5 years later, we came to the United States, and again, from scratch, really, remaking ourselves. I remember very clearly having to catch up on culture. I came at a time where I was the new wave. So, Duran Duran, Depeche Mode, all of these bands that people were listening to, and that I didn't know the words to the lyrics, So I made it a kind of homework to memorize the songs and in some way saturate myself with American life, because I needed to feel like I belonged, right? And also really eager to speak English. In many ways, I think that my eagerness to speak English in some ways delayed my writing, because I was so concerned with mastering English, and being able to, and I loved it too. I felt there was a really expedient way of speaking and writing, much more than Spanish. And very playful as well. And so, I made it my task to learn English as much as possible. And I think I'm doing well. I came when I was 12 and a half, and, when I get very tired, drink a little too much, or get angry, that kind of thing, the Ricky Ricardo comes out, and, all of that. But mostly, I think I can articulate a few sentences here and there. And so there was that kind of beginning. And also for me, I think beginnings have to do with new projects as well. And so, I always feel that sense of adventure that you feel when you get on a plane and you land in a different place. That's what I feel with embarking on a new journey with a project. So it's almost, you know, I was thinking about it the other day, and I still rely on that to make it through the pandemic. I think, you know, having new projects all the time, so that you have to wake up to something, you have to wake up to a beginning. And so that's sort of my discipline, to continue to have beginnings and see them to the end. You know, I commit to that beginning and project to the end and just go for it. And it's been, like I said, helpful in so many ways, in particular at this time, you know, when we're sort of timeless. In terms of the novel, it functions in similar ways. You know, for the novel, for example, the novel begins with an epigraph from Dante's Vita Nuova, which was really a poem about youth and love, a kind of journey that takes the young poet, you know, towards his very young love. And it's about beginning a new life. And so this is how the book opens. And it opens with a very young protagonist. You know, he's 13 years old, really in you know, between childhood and adulthood, right? A teenager, and all of the energy that adolescence, I think, encompasses or harnesses. And it begins that way. And just as Elio, who's the protagonist, is coming of age, the revolution triumphs. So these two things from the very outset are very much, you know, go hand in hand. And so there's that beginning, the beginning of the revolution. Everything is, you know, as in revolutions, turned upside down, but also set anew. The old is repurposed, you know, and disguised as new. Also, it's the moment of naming, you know, new things as well. There's also, of course, in the novel, you know, the marriage between Elio and his young love, Maria. That's the beginning, marriage is a beginning. And so we follow these young lovers through their marriage. And it's a marriage that in many ways echoes the phases of the revolution. You know, there's a honeymoon period, and later on there'll be disenchantment and disillusion. And so, you know, what we end up seeing is beginnings, but also the beginnings as illusion, as dream, all of that, but also the disintegration of that beginning as time goes by, and the energy of the beginning as it disintegrates through the years. I want to read a little section from the book that is precisely about this, and it's early on. It's chapter 12, takes place in 1969. And it's from the point of view of Elio, who's the protagonist. It says, summer of 1969 came in wet. Rain had been continuous since June, but to trace out the history of the whole summer in terms of rain, Elio thought, to say how it was raining at any given moment, to determine how yesterday's drizzle was different from today's showers was utterly impossible. Elio had always loved the rain, regardless of its type. Rain always came with impunity, drenching clotheslines, drumming on rooftops, seeping through crevices, and dropping with a tin into cooking pans in someone's living room. It was the one thing on this island no one could control. In revolutions, everything shifted and nothing changed. Reform after reform replaced the names of things with newer, shinier names, but the things themselves remained the same. Teatro Blanquita in Havana became the Karl Marx Theater, but continued to be what it had always been, the largest movie theater in Havana. The Hilton Hotel in Vedado was renamed Hotel Havana Libre, but its standing as Latin America's tallest and largest hotel was left unaltered. And as far as Elio was concerned, he could no more get his hands on a bicycle now than he could have years earlier. But he could always count on the rain to make him feel, well, hopeful. And there was hope, 10 million tons of hope, to be exact. In only 5 years, they have become the new men and women of a new world, a different, better world. So new were they that a man might discover that he was meant to teach and labor in the earth and commune with his fellow man. So new that the island women, tired of clotheslines and dinners and mops, might run for the hills, alphabets floating behind them like clouds, to teach the unlearned to read and write. So new that the children became the wards and the heirs of the revolution, and all were energized by a new resolve, by the opening up before them of the blinding flower-strewn meadows that led to justice finally, to victory always, and perhaps, because it was only the beginning, they were full of excitement and romance and love. Elio and Maria too, especially Elio and Maria. Thank you. Of course, this is going to change, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I find that fascinating. And it struck a chord with me also what you were just saying, because I've always thought of the relationship of to one's country in a way like a marriage. That when you go through these phases, you've written some poems about infatuation, and then
Exactly.
that SOP, and then you grow and you mature, or you drift completely apart, and that happens too. Yeah, so change, different beginnings, right? Geographical. Also, when you were talking about projects, it made me think you also different genres for you as well. It's a whole other topic, but
Right.
gosh, I was like, oh my God, I can barely do one thing good. So that really echoed to your talents as a multi-genre writer. And you mentioned a lot about like really obsessed with learning English, and I wonder, that's an experience that I sort of just was given because I got here when I was 45 days old. And I wonder how it seemed like, there's a lot of important role of books in the novel too. And I'm wondering, does that come also from like you're wanting to like take this language in, and like were you a reader? Were you like, early like we didn't read it. We didn't have books in English in my house. So like, but then again, I had I didn't have to learn English. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did have lots of books. It happened that my mom was the town's librarian. And so at a time when books were very, very difficult to get in Cuba because they there was no paper and printing and all of that. And so I got books that way. My dad also made sure, to always bring books for me. I have the proud title of being the fastest reader in first grade. And, I always feel like that's my claim to fame, There's a picture of me next to my friend Obelki's, in first grade, and they gave me a banner. I was so proud. But books were always, they were magical, they were a way they were really my toys. I had very little toys except, my aunts, for example, came with Vuelos de la Comunidad at some point in the late 70s. And, they brought us some book. They brought us a doll that spoke English. You pull the string and the little doll would say, "Hi, baby." Super cute, super cute. And then one Snoopy sock. We never found a second sock, which was tragic, of course. But books, I would spend all afternoons, outside in our backyard reading. And what I usually read, I loved adventure books. I love that kind of quest, where I think we see this in the novel in some way. Adventure books, and they were written, the ones I loved the most were written by a British author, Enid Blyton. I still don't know how to pronounce it in English. But she had wonderful, wonderful, wonderful books. And, I would read them over and over because at the library, they only had a limited few. So actually, when we went to Costa Rica, one of the most magical moments was walking into La Universal, which was this huge, or at least I thought it was, this huge toy store library in downtown San Jose, where they had all the collection. I couldn't believe it. And the smell of books is just, today, it's intoxicating, to walk into, the only bookstore that I have locally is the Barnes and Noble, but to walk in there and just smell new books is, it's invigorating. It transports you. So for me, it was a way to escape, in many ways. And then when I came to the US, it was, as you said, really, and I hadn't thought about that before, that it became this way of grasping knowledge. I think at some point, I would try to even at some point even read a book if right before I went out on a date, because it was some sort of, people might think, fix your hair, you do other things, but I would try to read a new book,
I love that.
to kind of amass more information. It made me feel whole in some way and confident to have conquered one new book, one new imaginary space, And in the novel, books are both wonderful and painful to read as the atmosphere, the political atmosphere, the economic challenges change or become more pronounced throughout the story and throughout the history that I try to capture in the novel. Books, at the beginning, the characters, Maria in particular, she's in love with books. She loves to read Madame Bovary, who of course, sort of the box within the box. Madame Bovary too is in love with books, right?
Right.
And so there's this echo of love for books, I think, in the novel as pages turning. And so she loves books, and she teaches or inspires Elio to love books too. And Elio ends up really loving Don Quixote, which is also a book about books in many ways. Our really first modern novel. To me it is. And so there's books as the leap of faith, books as what we can imagine, what we can dream of, all of that. At some point, unfortunately, I mentioned them being something painful too for Maria. Books are they constitute a kind of privilege, right? If you're caught up in the everyday trying to make ends meet, it's really unlikely that you have time to consume a book. You're too busy trying for life not to consume you. So, for Maria, she's tired of leaky refrigerators and not being able to get the things that she needs to make a meal, or the clothes that she's wearing, and how drab her house is. All of these things have really weigh on her, so much so that she's unable to continue to read. She can't escape the space she's in to be able to take that leap of faith into a new world, into a new space. People who can do that in the novel, people who can take that leap of faith and in some way imagine another story, are the survivors of the book, even if it's not through books, but a new story, being able to plan something new. And that's the project that I was talking about before, right? That's how I'm surviving the pandemic, by imagining something new. There's a wonderful, I think it's wonderful. It touched me. On chapter 13, it's about books, and right at the beginning of their marriage. And I'd like to read that. So this also, it's right after what I just read is chapter 12. So this is chapter 13. It comes right after. And they have just really been married. They've only been married about 5 weeks. Just a month and a day after their wedding, the sun was high and the sea was a glittering blue as Elio and Maria walked to the shore at Baracoa Beach. A surge of large, smooth waves came toward them, frothing up around their feet. They held hands and kissed, letting the ground sink beneath them as the waves pulled back into the sea. "Come on," Maria said. "We didn't come here for nothing." She was standing on one foot with her arms outstretched, playing burnt flamingo under the sun. Her skin had turned a bright red, and Elio feared she'd had enough sun for one day. He stared out toward the quiet menace that was all that water, a machine with machine-like creatures lurking beneath the surface. He didn't have the heart to swim. He simply couldn't do it. His legs wouldn't move. His body wouldn't budge. He was terrified. "You go," he told her, even as his heart beat fast for her and for what he knew could happen in the water. "Come on, don't be a ninny," she said, hopping, laughing, and pulling him by the hands. Elio could do nothing more than hold his ground. "No," he said, lifting his hands to his mouth to kiss them. "I'm not getting in the water." "Fine," she said, pulling her hands away. "I'll go in alone this time." but you'll have to get over your fear sooner or later. Elia watched as her body broke the waves and disappeared into the sunlight. He walked back to their towel and sat down. While he waited impatiently for her to come back, he tried to read, but his head was nowhere near Lincoln Island and the Nautilus. It was with Maria, and he hoped, prayed, she'd come back from the water in one piece. He felt sick to his stomach. They spent all afternoon at the beach telling each other stories. He, the one about the guy who found a cave full of gold and silver and precious stones. She, the one about the magic lamp, and the other one, the one about the sailor. Then, she said, they should start with the greatest book ever written in any language. Once you read it, you'll never be the same, she said. And she told him about windmills and giants and about the greatest of friendships between a caballero andante and his squire, and about the caballero's unbounded love for his Dulcinea. Elia was mesmerized by the lullaby voice. This will be a story long enough to last us all the years we'll spend together, Maria told him. Elia loved the idea, and he loved her. She told each story with great care, tenderly, quietly, rounding out every word as though each time was the first and the last time she'd pronounce había una vez. Sitting beside her on the sand, Elia concluded that Maria knew all there was to know about loving him. Perhaps she could guess that as long as there were words, as long as there were stories that he could want to hear again the next day and the next day after that, she would save him. And there would be no other destination than Maria, because she would be the only place he would ever want to be, his one and only story. And they made so many plans which they erected before them, like sandcastles, as elaborate as the stories they told and just as beautiful. They decided where and how they would live, who their friends would be, and what they would wear and eat and watch on TV, and how they would never let anyone dictate their lives or make choices for them or make them feel unwelcome or afraid, because they were young and this life was new, and like all new things, they were wrapped up in dreams. Though he tried to remember the finer details of each story, colors, sounds, and textures, his mind drew a blank, choosing instead to imagine Maria choking and swallowing water. Absorbed in the one task of getting another breath, her body flailed hopelessly against a force she couldn't see. Unable to wait any longer, Elia ran to the shore and looked out over the water. Children waded in and out of the surf, while a small blue motorboat crawled slowly toward the pier. Elia couldn't see anybody on it, and he couldn't see Maria in the water. His heart beat faster. He pushed into the surf far enough for the water to reach his calves. But he froze. He couldn't go any further. Maria, his voice came out broken. Swim back. A beat, then another, and suddenly, there she was in the distance. Maria, a small dot in a sea of sunlight, saw him and waved. Elia waved back, squinting. I think you should get out of the water, he shouted, his heart pumping in his chest. I'm coming, she yelled back.
Great, thanks. So I see also like, yeah, it's pieces are coming together between books and beginnings, like you were saying. And
Right.
that's once upon a time. Every time you open a book, it's a new beginning. And I love that. I love that passage and you know, where the reading in a book blends with life and all these kinds of things. Sort of what's reality. Well, that's what the beauty of reading. Yeah, I'm almost jealous of your books and your experience with books. I was a poor reader because again we didn't have books at home, but also in a way I think this would become a poet. I loved the short form because it was something I could get really quick, you know, really and get something out of it right away. But anyway, wonderful connections. There's a lot of obviously sea imagery, fish, the presence of fish. Or if you want to call it symbolic, obviously the sea means a lot to Cuba, Cubans, and island. It's something that's sort of always present. And certainly the title certainly points us in that direction, right? The idea of ocean and fish and whatnot. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and like kind of how you see that in the novel, as well as sort of how you maybe, you know, like conceptualized that in your mind for the novel and given your own experience and understanding of that infamous sea that surrounds us.
Right. So, you know, I think I remember once taking a literature class in at UCLA, you know, as I was doing my grad studies. And I remember the professor saying in Cuban literature, very few times you encounter the sea, right? Maybe you see it through a window, or you never really see the characters going out to sea. And I always made a mental note of that. And I said, when it's my turn, the sea is going to be all over the place, right? That's going to be the most important thing, because it was for us, for my family. My dad would get on a bike and take us all, my mom would be on the handlebars, I would be in the middle bar, and he would just, when my sister was born, who's 4.5 years younger than me, then she would also come on the bike. So it's 4 people on a bike, and he would pedal, all the way to the beach, And so the beach, it was, we would call it our beach, la playita de nosotros, and we would claim that little part of the beach. And it wasn't the best, the best part of the beach, certainly not the cleanest. It was pretty rocky, but it was ours, And we're not big swimmers in my family either. I can swim, but I'm not a huge swimmer. I remember going to Hawaii a few years ago and getting, really torn up by the waves. And, I was flailing my arms. Someone helped me. My husband ignored me. I came out all scratched up. So not a great swimmer. So for me, the sea is something quite beautiful, overwhelming, but I also fear it in many ways, And so I think for people who live in an island, and for anyone really, but in an island in particular, the sea, because we're so vulnerable, the sea can both bring friend or foe, right? So there's always, the promise of maybe a friend is coming from the sea, but also the enemy from the sea. And this is true in the novel, because at the beginning of the novel, Elio, the young 13-year-old boy, is attacked by a shark, So all these things are happening. The attack of the shark, the revolution's going, Elio's in love. He's starting to really be conscious of his sexuality too. So, the sea is both what the wonderful things that await us, but also the danger in those things. For Cubans, we have no borders, we have no land borders. We can't, if Cubans want to escape, they want to leave the country, as they have been doing, for many decades. Really, it's either a plane, or you take to sea, and we've seen that with the different migratory waves over the decades. That how important the sea has become, and how horrific too for many of the people who take out to sea and don't make it to the other side. So, for Elio, he always says at the beginning, how easy it would be if he had been born a fish, right? Because then he's definitely afraid of the sea, especially after he gets attacked by a shark. So, part of his issue that we just saw in chapter 13 is that he doesn't want to go back in the water. And so, it prevents him in many ways from really enjoying island life, because water is island life and life in general. Water is life-giving. And he recognizes that he loves the rain, for example, as we saw in the earlier passage, but going back to the sea is not something that he's capable of doing. Fish, to me, are symbolic of many things, but the very first image that the book began as a short story. So the very first image that I had for Elio was Elio sort of dipping his finger in a fishbowl and really being enamored of this goldfish and seeing himself in the fish, this fish trapped in this bowl, and a fish that was meant to be a trailblazer, but really ended up, nowhere near the sea, or nowhere near the future that he was hoping for. And so, fish are potential to me. They are bounty, what's plentiful. They're also creatures that, when you talk about certain stories, you talk about fish out of water, right? That's a phrase that we talk about for a certain structure in a story. And in this case, Elio is the fish out of water in Cuba, right? So he's in a place that he should feel comfortable in, but he's not. And he wants to get to that place where he feels at home. And of course, I won't give away the ending or anything like that, but until we're fish means until we're able to feel at home, until we're able to claim a space for ourselves and feel like we belong there. That resonates with me, not only because we had very difficult time in Cuba while we were there, so I have very happy moments, but also very, very sad moments full of tension and violence and ugliness. And so many times I didn't feel at home. And by the way, just to take it back to the English, many times to make me even more foreign, I would walk up and down the street with my sister and pretend we spoke English, as we got ready to come to California, but it would be like, blah, 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 something like that. Which I think, people looked at us like we were odd, so it made us even more strange to others. But fish are all of those things. They're signs for what is good, signs for what is coming. Fish know if, in the novel, they tell Elio when the hurricane is coming, so they have in many ways the gift of prophecy, according to him. He doesn't say it outright, but that's what it is. Fish know what's coming. And it's because they're in tune with this great natural body of water, and so I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, no, yeah, it does, but no, I mean, honestly, you kind of read this in the novel, but then also to hear it from you and just realize all the layers as I'm thinking about it myself. There's also, of course, fish and Christianity. That's a whole other, so many. I mean, and
that's important too, by the way, because it's also, he's looking for some kind of sign, some kind of spiritual connection. It doesn't have to be God necessarily, but he wants to make a connection, and he feels he's found it in fish.
And the irony of not being that fish also in the,
exactly.
You made me think about how many relatives of mine don't know how to swim either. I mean, over my Cuban, I was like,
isn't that bizarre?
Nobody in Cuba knows how to swim. But maybe it's also, I guess the sea is also I've always seen the sea or the ocean. Cuba is also, like you were saying, this wonderful idea of it being a barrier and but like a protagonist almost. It's there. It's constantly something you're working with and against. It also obviously in the political sense and how we cross that boundary, and so that's really neat. Yeah.
And the novel begins at the boundary between the island and the sea, because it opens up in the Malecon, so.
And again, I guess beginning too, it's where one thing ends and another begins.
And the other one begins.
And yet it's a very blurry sort of division. It's not. So one of the other questions I had, which is kind of neat. I mean, I was just thinking about, it made me think about a lot of American products and stuff are very, an American way of life are so ubiquitous in the novel, and the fondness for United States and Cuba and the relationship to us, to United States, but which is always something that I think most readers are really fascinated with, or most people that go visit Cuba are fascinated with the incredible obsession that Cubans have with America or the United States, and vice versa, right? Because I think it's a mutual. You could talk to somebody, somewhere in a farm in Kansas. They're like, yeah, I've always wanted to go to Cuba. They never want to go to Mexico or Uruguay or Spain or London, but they're so there's this mystique. Gustavo Perez, your book reminds me of that, and that echoed. So Gustavo Perez wrote this book called The Havana Habit, which talks a little bit about also that we have a border makes a big difference, but that border is so small, right? So in 80 miles you can be. Anyway, I was also thinking about some little terms of because I've been fascinated by that too. How do my parents, why do we know so much about the United States? We're Cuban, but also there's There's one thing I remember reading one time that said pisa y corre, which is what we call pisa y corre is what Cubans call Cubans on the island, Cubans in the United States call a station wagon.
Mhm.
And from what I remember historically, it was that some of the first automatic cars that came to the United States, that came to Cuba from the United States were station wagons. So pisa y corre means literally press, push and go, like you just press the pedal and go. But anyway,
It wasn't like the Flintstones that you got one foot out of the car and you got
like Royale, like baking soda. My grandmother just used to call it Royale because it's royal baking soda. Like
Yeah,
they don't call
yeah.
it. I don't even know the word for baking soda in Spanish. It was like Royale. So, but could you speak to that for our readers? Like also why that was also sort of, I mean, just part of the novel and important to it.
Yeah, I mean, Cubans in many ways, have been interested. I mean, there has been mutual interest, right, between the United States and Cuba since at least the 19th century. We had early on, there was an annexation project that didn't pan out for specific reasons that had to do with attitudes and changing attitudes and interests of the time and slavery and all of those things. But there was a plan for annexation of Cuba at some point to the United States. And so I think because of the proximity of the island to the United States, because in many ways, Cubans exchanged their fascination with la madre patria, with the colonial figure of Spain. They went from one source to the next, and that was the United States. And I think because the United States was a new nation, it was promising, it was powerful, and anything that's new and powerful, it's attractive, right? And we desire in many ways to possess it. And for Cubans, I think journals and images from the United States dictated the way people dressed, the way people talked, the way women understood their own bodies, even, the American figure or the American female figure in contrast to the Cuban female figure as seen in catalogs, for example, catalogs of sewing patterns and things like that, right? That I remember my grandmother having, and in Sears catalogs and the images that people saw when they went to Havana. And so, so many things were American in Cuba at the time for historical and cultural reasons. In the novel, for me, there has always been an understanding that when your eyes are set elsewhere, you have no eyes for, where you are and the reality that you're living through. And so, I have always wondered, and maybe some Cubans will kill me for saying this, but, I have always wondered why the fascination with leaving instead of staying and making something out of whatever's happening on the island, right? There are very many reasons for that. In the novel, Elio himself, he doesn't want to necessarily want to stay on the island, or at least he recognizes that it's almost impossible to stay on the island, but he also doesn't want to go to the United States. He wants to find another option, a third option. We see American products from the very beginning, from the outset. I mean, he uses a Coke bottle that he finds on the street in Havana to break the window where the bike, the Schwinn American beautiful red bike that he loves is, he's behind this storefront window. And, to me, that's a huge symbol, right? It's this Coke bottle on the street, and that's what he uses to break the window, to express his anger and frustration. And this is happening right before the revolution. So he cannot get his hands on a bike, let alone an American bike. Before the revolution, he will not be able to get his hands, or at times he will, but then they sort of disappear. on a bike after the revolution. So we see the Coke, we see the Sears window, the American bike. Maria herself learns English from the Sears catalog. So throughout the novel, you know, she comes up with these crazy phrases because she doesn't really know how to string the words together. So, you know, if her grandmother calls her to come inside the house, she'll say winter hats, you know, something like that, right? That she's read in the Sears catalog. She herself has a fascination with Chicago because the first Sears is in Chicago, and she's always dreamed of going there and walking around in the Sears, and she imagines herself wearing Sears products. And it happens that Elio's dad, who's left him and his mother, is now living in Chicago. His name is Ricky Perez, and Maria, you know, she dreams about the day when she finds herself there. So American products in the novel have to do with what's unattainable, you know, what is desired, what sets them on a quest, not necessarily what will eventually be fulfilling, but it's really the call to action, you know, what begins the movement toward the journey. I'm going to read a little section, and this is Maria. Maria works at a telephone company, and she loves to listen into conversations, and so she gets a lot of the information that she knows about the outside world from listening into conversations of people calling from Miami or from Texas or whatever it is. Let me see where it is. Okay, so this is later in the book. This is the 1994. So we're in the middle of the special period in times of peace, which is the period that that follows after the euphemism to describe the dwindling economic conditions after the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall and all of that. Just she'd been pulling and plugging cords around the clock at a 4-position manual board for decades. If she felt like only pulling them out now, then that's what she was going to do. Pull and plug, a technique most telephone companies had abandoned by the 1950s. But on this island, she was still pulling and plugging. She could have done away with the old board years ago, found a different job. Though most days she felt useful. Even when things got rough, she helped people find each other, a brother in Chickaloon, Alaska, hoping to reconnect with a sister in Bejucal when dengue-infected mosquitoes sank their mouth parts into people's necks. A recent divorcee in San Francisco calling in on an old elementary school flame after some light tremors had knocked down a vase from New Guinea. Someone in Delhi responding to a newspaper ad advertising young Cuban brides. And then there was Miami. So many calls from Miami, you'd think an alarm had gone off. Bleep, 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 bleep. Breakups, deaths, births, and cancer all came through the cables. It was she who held people's lives between finger and thumb. She who made reconciliations possible, who facilitated money transactions, reunited old lovers, and encouraged arguments and mistrust. But it went beyond that because sometimes she listened in, not to whole conversations, but to snippets. Then she'll pass the time wishing it was she whose voice reverberated through the cables like some rickety roller coaster. The calls that day have been mostly uneventful. Then, in the late afternoon, Pepe's voice came through her cable. Oye, he shouted. Tell Ellie to meet me at the park tonight. Despite her many gentle indications over the years that he could speak at a normal volume, Pepe was so convinced he needed to belt out his words loud enough to be heard through her cables. I'll let him know, she shouted back. She unplugged his line and rubbed her abused ear for a moment, then began working to connect the next call, a long-distance exchange. It was a call from Chicago. Her heart started to beat faster. Suddenly, she remembered the promise she'd made to her grandmother, a promise she'd never intended to keep. She was once again reminded of her childhood dreams, of snowy landscapes and lights. So many lights, only lights as far as she could see. She couldn't recall why she started dreaming of Chicago in the first place. Perhaps it was the crunch, crunch, crunch of snow she'd heard amplified in old American films that made Chicago better than Hollywood, better than Miami. Or perhaps it was her darling Sears, the magic and glitter of which she could still remember. She could hardly have known that what life had been like in Chicago for Elio's father. One could only guess. Snow, white like talcum powder, like a luxurious blanket over everything, just as she'd seen on TV. How she wished for it that day. She wanted to complain to Nina about the heat, but she wouldn't have known what to say. So much of it had become vapid and predictable. Just as she was about to pick up a blinking line, Nena wistfully alluded to lunch, crying to get her attention by miming peeling and devouring a banana. Operator, Bauta, Maria finally exhaled into the mouth of the receiver. Allo, 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 Ricky Perez here, the voice said. Maria froze for a moment. She thought she would say something straightforward like, we need you to help us. She took a deep breath, then hesitated. And finally, just when she thought she'd get the words out, she simply lacked the courage. Where to? She said. There was a nervous urgency to her voice that she tried to contain by putting her hand on the mouthpiece and catching her breath away from it. Maria had received a few phone calls in her time that surprised the fuck out of her, but this one she never expected. Every few years she'd think of the city. She was in love from afar with this Chicago. The thought moved like one big muscle through her mind, shoving everything else out of the way with a kind of animal grace. She had started dreaming on the day Elliot showed her the postcard, or was it earlier? She was in love with Chicago from afar, even as cities like Miami, LA, New Jersey, New York, Paris, Madrid, and Barcelona had ruined the island for whole generations. Over centuries, Cubans had looked about themselves and seen value only in what was foreign, what was outside of themselves. Yes, it must be true, they told themselves. Paris, Madrid, and Barcelona must be better than this small island. Miami, LA, New Jersey, New York, and Chicago must all be better than this. There was confirmation of it all around them in t-shirt logos and canned food items, movies and phone calls, long distance phone calls. Everyone waited for them. Putting up with echoes and cut off conversations, long distance phone calls had replaced cassettes and letters laced with starch and iron dollar bills. 18-karat gold chains as fine as thread. She had no relatives abroad, so she had to make do with people's conversation and code. Again and again, Chicago had appeared in the margins of her life without influencing in the least its basic text. Lately, though, she thought of it more and more. Thoughts illuminated by movie marquees, hotel signs, and all that snow. But though leaving seemed possible again, Elliot wasn't going anywhere. He was staying put, wasting motion, as if it would go on forever, as if to spin one's wheels was to go somewhere.
It's kind of another kind of element of the book, so to speak, the idea of the stories heard through that, the story being in a Sears catalog, right? In some
Exactly.
ways, that kind of dreaming, that escaping or learning or going into places that the imagination lets us go through words and pictures. Right. So I think we're going to do a few questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
That was fast.
Lovely conversation. Time's fun when you're catching flies, as my boss used to say. So let's see. First, we have an anonymous attendee asking, what moved you to write about the time period of revolutionary Cuba? Is that sort of something you would have? Yeah. What moved you to write?
Well,
about?
I mean, if I think Cuba in many ways still in the throes of revolution in some ways, right? So I definitely didn't want, I mean, one of the reasons that I went from the short story to the novel is because, you know, in a short story, you focus on a day, a couple of days, right? A few characters, and the kinds of questions that I had about Cubans and the reasons what they leave and why they leave, and what happens when they stay behind, what happens to those who stay behind, really required greater space, right? Much more time. And so, you know, it would have been impossible, I think. I cut it off in 1995. Really, it would have been too thick of a novel. I was more interested in looking back at what had gotten us there. And so, you know, I started off at that beginning that for many of us was the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So the reason why I chose the revolution is because we've been at it since 1959. Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that, because not many authors in the United States write about, you know, it's like Cuba's, you know, stopped in 1958 or 59, and sometimes, or like me, we're just living in memory of our parents. So to be able to bring those stories to the page is really important to see the Cuba. Like you said, we're still in the throes of that revolution.
of that moment. Yeah.
of that moment.
Still trying to absorb it and yeah.
Yeah. Someone asks, could you talk a little bit about your writing process? Do you tend to did you start from the plot first, or did the characters emerge to you first? Or was there a first?
So my trajectory as a writer, I think, has dictated in many ways how I approach the writing process. I started off as a poet first, and I think I'm continue to consider myself more a poet than a prose writer. So for me, the image always, the image comes first, and then trying to find the language with which to build that image, or to bring that image to life, sometimes more successfully than others. So in the case of this novel, like I was telling Richard, really one of my first images was this older man, in his 50s, not that the 50s are anything old, but he was older, and then and looking at this little fish, and so that was my image. I started from there. I always knew the end, and to me that was really important, and it paid off, because I had a destination in mind from the very beginning. I was able to write toward the end, and in many ways not look back. The problem was, so I started with a short story that really is the end of the novel, and I had to work myself back, and then again toward the end. I'm sure there are better ways of doing this, but it worked. It worked for me. I work every single day. I always have, since I started writing when I was about. I started writing when I was about 17. Before that, I was drawing and painting, so I was more of an artist. And then since then, I've been very, very disciplined. I write every single day, even if it's trash, even if it's something that I will never use. Not only do I accept it the way it comes to me, I also save it, because today's trash may be tomorrow's treasure.
Right.
Yeah. So I work every day. For the novel, that was true. I finished the first draft in 6 months. It wasn't a perfect draft. It was a draft, after all, but I finished it very quickly. From that point forward, it was again going back and revising, which I really, really enjoy. And I think it's one of, I've said this before, it's one of the most fruitful parts of the writing process for me. It's revising, working with an editor, because that's when you really see your story shine, really come alive, when you start adding these little details and looking at the minutia, which I love to do. And paying attention to the rhythm too. For me, rhythm is extremely important. I think probably comes from poetry. I wrote a lot of sonnets at some point.
Yeah.
So the OCD of the iambic pentameter, it's really big for me. And then so I pay attention to that. I want I love language to be truthful, but also beautiful. I want to, in some ways, enchant the reader if I can, with the language. So that's very important to me, more so than structure, more than anything else. The language with which you tell the story, I think it's a story in itself. So I don't know if that answers. Yeah.
Thank you. Here's a question for both of you. Actually, it asks, what have you been reading lately, if you've been able to?
Oh gosh, you go first, Richard.
That's pretty easy for me, because I'm in a project and now I've a new beginning. I'm writing another a memoir that's really, and I, just speaking of what Susannah said too, I think that sometimes from book to book, from genre to genre, or just even when you write the next novel, processes change. So I wrote a childhood memoir, 7 to 17, about growing up in Miami. This is a very different memoir, so the process has
Mm.
been different. And so I've been reading really sort of complicated memoirs that deal with a lot of fractures in time and lack of memory. And
Oh.
most recently, Natasha Trethewey's Memorial Drive.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah.
So and then reading a lot of believe it or not, folks, writing is a continuous journey all of life. Reading some craft books about fracturing time and reading nonfiction books about writing still at the ripe age of 32. So yeah, that's what so I'm immersing myself in this new project, and therefore that's what you do. You read stuff that you think is going to inform your writing, not just the craft, but also just inspire you to say like, wow, I can do this. This can get done. Look what this person did. How amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gosh, well, that's a lot, Richard. You've been doing more than me. I don't think, I mean, I would say lately, but lately I would say in the last year or so, I've been reading, which I really love, Elena Ferrante. You know, some of her novels. Watching at some point, it was I think it was HBO that had My Brilliant Friend.
Yeah.
Several seasons. I'm waiting for the next season, but they take so long. You know, I was hoping they give me the gift of that series during the pandemic, but we haven't been so lucky. I've been doing, you know, and I'm not ashamed to say so. I've been engaged more in film and television lately. It's you know, it's something that I can do with the kids around, you know, that we can do as a family. Reading can be such a solitary, you know, endeavor, and with everyone in the house, it's a little bit more challenge. And I mean everyone in the house, including a bird, and you know, also. So I haven't been doing a lot of reading other than rereading my own work, really. You know, I've been working on a translation. Actually, the translation has been done for a long time, but I'm working on the introduction of translation of Cuban ethnographer Lydia Cabrera's second collection of short stories, which I did a very long time ago, and they were promised to a press, and I never got around to doing the introduction. So, you know, if there's a time to finish another project, this is the time. So I've been working on that and rereading her original story so that I can begin to look at mine and look at hers, do the final touches. So that's what I've been reading. And as I read her, thinking a lot about the work of Zora Neale Hurston, for example, who also did similar work. Yeah. And so, and you know, they never met or anything like that, but they were doing similar things, you know, Zora in Eatonville, Florida, and Lydia in Cuba. So that's really what I've been doing, and you know, having these amazing events. So I get to read a few of my a few sections of my book, and sort of reminisce on what it was like to write it. But really, I've been doing film and TV, and I'm very happy with it at the moment.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. And I think we're at time. So I think we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much to both of you, Susannah and Richard, for this beautiful conversation. And thanks to all of you out there for spending your evening with us. To learn more about this remarkable book and to purchase copies of Until We're Fish, you can go to harvard.com. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, Mass, please have a good night. Keep reading. Stay sane and stay safe. Thank you so much. Safe, yes. Have a good night to both of you.
Let's steal that one. Bye, Susannah.
Bye, Richard. Bye, everybody. Besito. Bye. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye now. Thank you.